Machine here, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. 20-minute video for 2 minutes worth of content. Gold.
There are many contract scenarios that cause problems for players trying to go elsewhere, teams trying to get new players, teams figuring out how to let go of a player knowing that they themselves might have a big buyout around the corner. And so one of the main issues has become, because these players haven't let their contracts end and just become unrestricted free agents and able to sign anywhere they want, if they want to leave a team that they're currently contracted to, then the team that wishes to sign them must agree to a buyout. Buy them from the team, basically buy the remaining contract from the team that currently owns it. That makes absolute sense. The issue is that we hear some of the buyout numbers and they seem way too high relative to the salary that people are getting. But logically, if you think about how the scene is working and the fact that these numbers have to be relative to each other in order for people to be able to do business, this is where the problem arises. So we hear about FNS supposedly costing $200,000 for Cloud9 to buy. We hear about Stu 2K supposedly more than double that as a buyout to go over to Now Immortal's MIBR. Flamey and Simple, we heard that story that the combined cost for the two of them was $1.2 million. Currently, we have the G2 players, Apex and MBK, where we heard each one is valued at $800,000 each. That's top level players. These are people you've heard of before, or at least have been at majors, the tier 1 tournaments. There are lower level players you've never seen at a tier 1 tournament who have $40,000 buyout, $25,000 buyout, and therefore are actually prohibited from moving up to bigger level teams. Now, in the past of esports, go back more than, say, 3 or 4 years ago, this wasn't really an issue. Not least because, first of all, a lot of people had short contracts, maybe a year long, and in fact, successful teams would very easily convince a player to just sign a new contract at the same rate as before. There wasn't the same kind of market for people to buy and sell teams, and teams to massively be mobile with where they go and what kind of offers they entertain. There wasn't as much new money coming to the scene. There's also the fact that it very much was on the team that wanted to sign the player to be able to come up with some sort of a deal that made sense with the person that they were signing them from. Or rather the other way around, the team that wants to let go of the player, it's on them to find a deal that makes sense, because these contracts were practically never enforced. They were never taken to court or someone being sued over the fact that this player was under contract with me and he left to go elsewhere. The money we're talking about at the time wasn't worth it, and the hassle of going to a court for a few years and the battle and pay legal fees also wasn't worth it. So people just found a way to figure these deals out, and they were incentivized to make the trade work, since that player could just basically leave. No way to enforce the contract and go to any team he wanted to anyway. So he wasn't really owned by you entirely, even though in a legal sense he obviously was. Now, obviously part of the issue here is each party has totally different interests. So players want to have mobility. Yeah, sure, they want a good salary, they want a good chance to win. These are all certainly key elements, but ultimately players want to be able to go to a different team when it's not working out in this current squad. They want to be able to bring new players in when it's not working in this particular team. Part of the problem in Counter-Strike is there's very few 5-man lineups last more than a year in terms of the team actually wanting to keep that 5-man lineup together. And so when contracts are more than a year in most cases, 2 years or more, and there are these buyouts involved, everyone's going to run into these buyout problems again and again and again. And so players, in theory, should want the smallest contracts possible, the least long contracts that you can get, because they are going to need to bring in a new teammate. They're going to need to go to a new team themselves, especially if they need to discover who they are as a player because they've gone to shit in this particular squad. Problem is, what do owners want? Ultimately, owners want stability, right? Yeah, they want a good team and chemistry and work ethic and marketability. Yeah, all that. But ultimately, owners want to know, I've got these players under contract for, say, 2 years. I can go, I can sell to sponsors, the kind of players I've got, the fact I'm going to have a Counter-Strike squad for a few years. I'm in these particular leagues. We've made it to majors in the past. This is all really good stuff to build the deck from which you're going to sell to the sponsors and what type of a team you are. You don't want to be chopping and changing every 6 months, every 9 months, even though you yourself, because of the nature of Counter-Strike, are going to end up in that scenario where you're going to need to think about that. Then there's the fact that how can you sell your players really cheap with a really nice, agreeable, attainable buyout when you yourself are going to have to pay a buyout for a player that you're going to need to replace this guy, or in the future, just when you need to happen to get another player anyway, you're going to have to pay a buyout. So if everyone else charges 100k for a player that's a 7 out of 10 level, how can you charge 50k? Because the 50k you get to sell a player You're now going to be losing 50k when you try to sign a similar player. You're just losing money on the deal. So being a nice guy makes no business sense whatsoever. Then there's the fact that, say you're on the different ends of the scene. Say you're a top team, a top 5 team in the world, and a player wants to leave or he doesn't fit your team anymore. You're going to, again, as I said, have to pay a lot for your own buyout to get the player you want to replace him with. But okay, you want to help this guy move to where he needs to go because you know it's not going to be your team. Why would you sell him to another squad who's a top team where presumably is a destination you'd want to go for a very cheap amount of money? Now, they wouldn't sell you a player cheaply, so why would you sell them a player cheaply? Not only that, when you sell this player to another top team, you're selling a valuable piece to a rival who might use that piece to beat you. So you want it to be enough money that you feel happy selling in that circumstances, or you make them really pay for it if they're hungry enough to want to take a player that will help them beat you and overtake you. Again, there's competitive advantage here. If otherwise, maybe I just say, wait a few more months. You can either have him in a few months, therefore you can't have him now and beat me with him, or I'll wait a little while and see if I actually still want to use him. Maybe actually there's just some tension in the team right now. And in a few months, they might think, hey, actually, let's bring back that guy we had before. But I still have him on the bench, still paying his salary. Therefore, my prerogative, right? Ultimately, since the team owner has signed this long contract, paid this high salary, provided everything for the team, it is up to him. He owns the team. These are the contracts within his team. Why should he sell cheaply just so that the player can go where he wants to go and a fan can watch the player play for that team? That's not actually a very reasonable demand to make, right? Then look at if it was a lesser team, some team that has a player who's way better than the team is, and he wants to move on, and obviously fans want to see him play in a better team, or maybe even the best team, and see what he could do there. It feels like, you're holding this player back. But I'm a lesser team. Don't I get a benefit from having found this player and got him onto my team before everyone knew he was amazing? Okay, so I've got him on my team now. He's played for my team a little bit, shown he's really good. If a top team wants to come and get him, they've got all the money. Why should I give him away for very little money just as his career would be accelerated by a year? Shouldn't I get some value about it? If people aren't willing to pay, maybe he has to play out the rest of his contract in my team and I get to benefit from the best case scenario of having that player, which is to have him play for my team and have one of the world's best players. If he's got to move on and he wants to move on and a top team wants him, surely they should have to pay a very competitive market value to get a player that I cannot replace. Having a big bag of money and putting it in my bank account won't make up for the lack of a Simple, a Nico, an Oscar, some fabulously talented player who's on a much worse team than his skill level now suggests he should be on. Even having that money alone isn't as good as having the player. I'd much rather have the player, but if I have to let go of the player, I better get a big bag of money because I can't replace him in the game. We saw what happened to a team like Hellraisers when they lost an Oscar, etc. They've never had a player as good as that again. There's never been a player in mouse sports as good as Simple. Nico, rather, obviously confused. Likewise, flip side, there's never been a player as good as Simple in that squad. Why should they sell their player? Again, this is a whole scenario where they're going to have to make purchases one day. They're going to have to start all over again and scout out new players. They just had an amazing player. The best case scenario is to keep that player or to get a lot of money for him. Why would we give him away for nothing? Do you not understand how economies work? Why would what's even the leverage for me to have to sell? That the player wants to leave, right? And I want to make something from him. Therefore, let's see how competitive the offers are. If no one was paying any of these buyouts, a lot of these buyout prices wouldn't be as high, right? It's all based on each other. It's all based on perceived demand. So obviously, one of the reasons why buyouts are even a problem is because everyone's on 2 and 3 year contracts. Yet, within 6 to 9 months, a number of players in top 10 teams are going to need to leave, want to leave, or other teams will want them when their original team doesn't, or it's not working for them in their original team. So we have contract lengths that are way too long, but players who want to be mobile within half that time or less, and teams that want to be immobile in half that time or less. So here's the thing that to me doesn't make sense. Is that for the player, it doesn't make any sense to sign a 2 or 3 year contract. If you're a good player, then within that time span, you are going to want the chance to renegotiate your contract or go elsewhere test the market, see if you're worth more, see if your whole team's worth more, see if new money coming in wants to sign you at a massive price. You want the chance to renegotiate because it's in your best interest. Doesn't make sense for you to be in a 3 year contract. Especially because the scene changes so rapidly that a great deal at the beginning of a 3 year contract almost certainly will not be a great deal at the end of a 3 year contract. Then consider if you're not that great a player and you're not in that great a team. Well, now if you're not that great a player and you signed a 3 year contract, you might now get put on the bench at half salary. And that might just mean you're stuck there. Now, in certain circumstances, that salary might not actually make the contract legal, but you're in a scenario where you can't go anywhere. And you know what? Since there's a buyout and you used to have name value, you're not in very good form, so no one really wants to buy you out. And then when you try and convince a team to, if the buyout's a little bit too high, they'll just say, well, for 80k, I might as well go and buy a really good player. So they won't buy you. Yet here's the thing. Players are the ones who could start to erode this. Now, for teams, it doesn't entirely make sense to have the long-term one. Yes, for marketing reasons. Yes, you want to control your own fate, not have players be fickle and just leave your team one day and then you have nothing and you've invested all this money. But at the same time, I think for teams, it doesn't make sense to have 3-year contracts. You get in the same scenario. You're going to have to charge a buyout that's too high because of what you basically promised to the player. You're going to be in a scenario and you want to sell years of his contract at this point in time. Also, you're going to have to do buyouts yourself. So it also doesn't make as much sense for everyone to have the long contracts. But okay, if all your competitors have 3-year contracts, you having a 1-year contract only does them a favor. It doesn't do you a favor overall, does it, right? So in that scenario, I can see why none of the teams are willing to bring it down. So it's got to be the players. At the moment, I think only the elite squads could actually argue some of these teams down. What they could do is when they have all the suitors come to them, I'm a massive new org with all this new money that's coming in with hundreds of millions in investment. I want to make a new org and have you play for us. Okay, right. What do you offer? You offer this much salary, this much in terms of like sticker money. You're going to give us these resources, right? Contract length. I need to talk to you about that. It can't be 3 years. I'm willing to take a little bit less salary or willing to make the buyout a little bit more expensive, but let's make it a year contract, a 2-year contract, whatever the span is. Teams could be the ones who start to do that. Now, I'll tell you why elite level squads, elite players in Counter-Strike won't do that is because they don't care about those numbers until they get into this situation. All they care about up front, most of them, is the raw actual amount of salary. That's all they care about is how much do I get paid every month? Because they know as soon as I'm in the contract, 1 month in, I'm getting paid that. So they will take the highest figure there and give up practically everything else. That's been my experience with even top level pros. And that is the thing where they might have even come in with a reasonable thing of like, I would like to get this and that. But if someone says to them quite shrewdly, I'll give you a bit higher salary if actually that aspect goes away, or if the contract's a little bit longer than you wanted, or the buyout's a little bit more of a hit, you know, for all these factors, and I'll give you more salary, but you basically give up all the rest. Too many players will say, who gives a fuck, right? Take the money, and you know what? I'm not going to be a bad player anyway. That's one of the problems. People never believe it'll be them who's the one who's trapped in contract prison. Then you got the scenario that players could be the ones to make buyouts more reasonable as well. Again, if you say, I'll take a slightly lower salary if my buyout's a little bit more reasonable, around this kind of a number, looking at where their salary at. But again, who goes into a contract thinking they're the player that will be cut? They're the player that will have to leave their team. They're the player that's going to go to this totally different squad they've never even conceived of playing for. Not the case, right? I personally think the best way that players could help themselves in this scenario is good players and good teams could use lower buyouts or lower contract length as the bargaining chip when a lot of suitors come to them. That way, someone who can't offer you 25k a month, but he can offer 20k a month, he could say, you know what, the way I'll compete with the guy who can offer the 25k is I'll give you a 1.5-year contract instead of a 2-year contract. Instead of demanding 3 years, I'll say it's going to be a 1.5 years, or it ends after 3 majors, or whatever kind of interval you want it to be. And that's a way they can then win out on the deal by giving you overall a more complete contract that makes more sense for you as a player. Because as I said, as a player, it never makes sense to be locked in for that long, but also gives something back to the owner. He has to gain something. He has to gain his own competitive advantage, being able to get a team that's better than he can afford in terms of raw salary, or he's given something up, but it's making more sense in terms of where he can be at in the industry. So he's given up the little something, but he gains an edge over someone who elsewhere had more raw money than he did, or investment, therefore, to spend that liquid capital. Then you've got a scenario where for teams, I think the solution for teams is just to learn how to wait out contracts. Don't just give in to your players the second they say there's a problem in the team. Or they say, we got to have this player over here. Oh, his contract's like 200k. Oh, I must have him right now. And if we do, we'll win. No, actually be like real professional sports teams. Plan out your year. Plan where you're going to be in 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. Make a long-term plan to have an amazing team in 2 years. So that means going out there, talking to other pro players, talking to other teams, finding out roughly when some of their contract lengths are, and then having short-term solutions that you can try. No, some of them will fail. Therefore, you have a buyout of 50k, try that player, didn't work after 6 months. But you know what? I'd already scouted this other guy's contract ends in 8 months. I've been building my whole plan a la LeBron James in 2010 with The Decision, where people already planned years in advance and they already had all their pitches to him, like you'll be the king of New York, come to Chicago, play with Dwayne Wade. You know, they had all these different deals that they were offering. Come to the Mavericks, there's no tax here, or whatever the fuck it was. They had all these different ways to pitch him and try and get him to come to their franchise. Similarly, I think that's what should be going on with the Studio 2Ks, the Tareks of the world. If you want to sign them, is you should find out when their contract length ends and you should go and do it. Then again, some of these players have just re-upped their contracts. If they then complain to me about buyout and being in contract prison, at this point, I don't think anyone who buys into that knows how basic market economy works or what would be fair. Why would it be fair for you to just sign a deal with someone and then say, right, I want to leave immediately for very little money, actually, much less than the market value? No, that wouldn't seem reasonable at all, would it? So I want people to be able to wait that long. Because remember, another issue here that is going to be nothing like sports is we don't have deep benches of players. We don't have players who stay on teams and practice a little bit with them, but then are like the 8th best player on the team. And maybe if you switch to this map, you start playing a la the Overwatch League. We don't have that. We have 5 starters. That's probably all. And as soon as you hit a problem with your lineup, especially if you're a good team, you want to do a drastic roster move to get a good player in to immediately get back to the top. That is not going to be tenable under a 2 or 3 year contract for the player or the team, quite frankly. You're both going to be in a bad spot in that sense. There's then also the fact, and this is one of the biggest pressing issues, is that most people want to leave, aside from being bad and wanting to go to a team to have a chance again, or bring in a better player. The other factor is money. They hear that this team over here, so I always give the example of Mouse Sports. There are many, many teams much, much worse than Mouse Sports in terms of placing, making much more salary. So if I'm one of those players, I go, I'm one of the best teams in the world. Why the fuck am I not getting as high a salary as this guy whose team can't even make it to the major? In that scenario, the whole team might want to leave. So part of the problem there is the rapid growth of the industry, just in terms of market value of players' salaries and contracts, is going up too fast. It's not tenable. It's not going gradually up year on year. It's going like... And part of the problem here is salaries gone up too quickly and in a totally variable manner across the industry where there's not always a logic. It's not always about the marketing or the success of the team. There's aspects like raw investment in the team. People who have very bad business models who in the short term are willing to spend a lot of money have inflated the salary market. Yeah, sure, people could wait out 5 years for these idiots to lose all their money. But in the meantime, will they lose all their top players? Will the players be too fickle to see a proper organization that has stability and things that they can offer them in a long-term partnership? Will they just go to the brand new org that has the most money? History tells us they probably will do the latter, sadly. So over time, that's going to stabilize. And over time, yes, there's a lot of stupid money now, but hopefully infrastructure will win out. Hopefully those people will eventually not be able to get more investment money because they'll have nothing to show for it. Hopefully things will go to a level where they're appropriate and in proportion to where the actual media level is, viewing level, sponsor interest is, fan interest, and then we can actually have buyouts and contracts that are sensible, but also fair, so that the owners aren't getting ripped off, the players aren't just going for nothing because they themselves happen to be fickle. This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Gardner Wilson, Andreas Snazore Westerlund, Alex Adams, Daniel Yordanov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Robert Baxter, and Travis Greb, with a special thanks going out to Jerky's Minion. Want teasers for my upcoming content? To ask a question for my monthly AMA? How about taking part in a discussion with me about esports? Or perhaps you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Become a part of the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link in the description box below.